America's unprecedented concentration of wealth at the top is no accident. It is the product of decades of strategic social engineering, a powerful alliance of pro-business conservative ideologues and religious right leaders steered public opinion and policy to favor the wealthy. They convinced average Americans to support agendas that undermine their own economic interests. Modern technology, from social media algorithms to AI-driven propaganda, has supercharged this effort. Meanwhile, tools like gerrymandering have cemented minority rule in politics. This analysis traces the historical roots of this trend. It examines how technology and disinformation fuel it today, and it explores what the future may hold if America cannot reverse course. The alliance of conservative economics with religious rhetoric began as a direct reaction to the New Deal. In the 1930s and 40s, corporate America felt threatened by President Franklin D. Roosevelt's pro-worker policies. Business leaders realized they needed moral authority on their side to push back against calls for wealth redistribution. Historian Kevin Kruse reveals how industrialists recruited clergy to sanctify capitalism. Government intervention was painted as a denial of God. The idea of free market capitalism became intertwined with religious faith. This corporate-funded religious revival reshaped American civil religion. By the 1950s, "One nation under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance. "In God We Trust" appeared on U.S. currency. President Dwight Eisenhower embraced the idea that America had a spiritual mandate against collectivism. Church membership surged to record highs. This era successfully sanctified wealth accumulation. Being a God-fearing American became linked with defending capitalism and opposing government intervention. The modern conservative religious political alliance solidified in the 1970s and 1980s. The Powell Memorandum of 1971 laid out a strategy for corporate America to fight back against progressive policies. Corporate lobbyists in Washington skyrocketed, from 175 in 1971 to nearly 2,500 by 1982. At the same time, evangelical Christian leaders mobilized their followers into a moral majority. This coalition married religious conservatism with laissez-faire economics. Ronald Reagan rode this alliance to victory in 1980, declaring that government is the problem. His policies, tax cuts, deregulation, and union busting, directly benefited the economic elite. From that point forward, the gap between the rich and working class exploded. Since Reagan, the U.S. has seen constant deregulation, privatization, and deunionization. The share of national wealth held by the top 1% has surged to over 31%, while the bottom 50% owns just 2.6%. With this ideological groundwork laid, conservative elites convinced millions to support policies that harm them economically. Thomas Frank's book, What's the Matter with Kansas?, highlights how Republicans pivoted political discourse away from economics. Instead, they hammered on cultural and religious issues, such as abortion, school prayer, and gun rights. This created a values voter identity that distracted from stagnating wages and wealth inequality. Many working-class voters were urged to vote based on cultural grievances, even as their standard of living declined. At the same time, right-wing media framed any attempt to curb inequality as class warfare. Democrats, fearing backlash, shifted toward a centrist stance, abandoning aggressive economic populism. As a result, corporate lobbying and tax cuts for the rich faced little political resistance. Today, economic studies show that the policy preferences of average Americans have near zero influence on U.S. law. Instead, politicians primarily respond to wealthy donors and special interests. In the 21st century, social media and AI-driven propaganda have made manipulation easier than ever. Facebook's algorithm actively segregates users into partisan echo chambers. Research shows that misinformation spreads more rapidly on conservative social media pages. Twitter's internal study even admitted that its algorithm amplifies right-wing content more than left-wing content. Political campaigns now use AI-powered micro-targeting to tailor misinformation to different audiences. For example, evangelical voters receive customized messages about religious persecution. Meanwhile, working-class conservatives get fed stories about immigrant job stealers and welfare abuse. This ensures that economic populist messages never gain traction across party lines. Instead, AI-powered disinformation keeps Americans divided and distracted. While minds are manipulated online, the mechanics of democracy have also been rigged. Partisan gerrymandering has allowed conservatives to retain power even with a shrinking voter base. After the 2010 census, Republican strategists redrew district maps to cement minority rule. In Wisconsin's 2018 elections, Democrats won more votes statewide, but secured only 36% of assembly seats. In North Carolina, Republicans can win a supermajority with barely half the popular vote. This allows them to block economic reforms, even when the majority of their constituents support them. For example, gerrymandered GOP legislatures have refused Medicaid expansion, keeping thousands uninsured. Even policies with bipartisan public support, like higher wages or infrastructure investment, are ignored. Instead, these legislatures push culture war distractions like anti-LGBTQ laws and abortion bans. The United States now faces a critical question: can this cycle of wealth concentration and social manipulation be reversed? Experts warn that extreme inequality threatens democracy itself. If public frustration continues to grow, America may face one of three futures: reform and renewal. If voters demand fair representation, economic justice, and tech regulation, democracy can be saved. Stagnation and soft apartheid. The US could settle into a de facto oligarchy, with extreme class divides but no major rebellion, authoritarian backlash or collapse. If unrest escalates, the country could face mass violence, political breakdown, or even dictatorship. Which path America takes depends on whether enough people recognize the social engineering at play. If the public remains distracted by manufactured culture wars, the oligarchs will continue their unchecked rule. But if Americans demand real economic justice, the tide could turn before it's too late. America's rising wealth inequality was not inevitable. It was deliberately engineered. Reversing this trend requires awareness, organization, and action. If the country does nothing, the future may be one of entrenched minority rule and economic servitude. But if the people reclaim their democracy, a fairer system is still possible. The choice and the future is in our hands.